A nuclear Iran will cause an arms race in the Middle East. A nuclear arms race. They do not think rationally, they think radically. Arab nations will have WMDs, which will cause a threat to our great ally and model of democracy in the Middle East, Israel. That's why I work with Bibi time and time again with my economic sanctions to stop a nuclear Iran. My economic sanctions have halted the progress and will continue to. Under the Obama administration, there will not be a nuclear Iran.
All right, Governor Romney.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Ms. Fosterstrom. And thank you, Weinbach High School, specifically Dr. Becker, for allowing this debate to take place. Obama has proposed that we implement sanctions on Iran to cut them off. Yet, in a recent study released by the Wall Street Journal, Prime Minister Netanyahu was incorrect in his interpretation that the Iranians would be at maximum nuclear capacity by the springtime. Rather, they will be ready in a mere 2 to 4 months and will have nuclear capabilities by then. Mr. Abbasi, the head of the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, told reporters at the end of a cabinet meeting in Tehran that Iran is completing its nuclear activities as scheduled, regardless of the negative Western media speculations and reports. The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, reports the Fordow facility has added 350 centrifuges since May, in addition to their already installed 1,000 centrifuges, as part of their goal to have 3,000 by the end of the year. This can't be allowed to happen. President Obama states that he has implemented as many sanctions as he can and has done the best he can, but it can't be that he has done the best he can, or they would not be moving forward. We need to increase the isolation of Iran. We need to increase and implement more sanctions. We need to send in more ships. We need to send in more military, make our presence more felt stronger. We need to make sure that Iran knows that they will not be allowed, they will not be tolerated with nuclear capabilities.
All right, thank you.
Education is America's foundation because with the promise of a good education, one can go out and work hard, get a good job, and take America one step forward to fixing our economy. An issue this vital needs federal attention. We cannot cut spending on education because it's too important. Romney claims that his goal is to have U.S. schools compete with schools in India and China. Well, let me tell you something. In a recent poll, American schools were ranked 25th out of 34 countries in math and science. How do you expect for our schools to compete with schools in India and China by cutting spending? We need to increase spending on education, and we need to leave this in federal hands, not in the hands of individual states and parents. In 2009, I signed a stimulus bill called Race to the Top. We awarded points to states who made education in their schools better and raised their classroom standards. The result, just today, 46 states so far have adopted these standards, and that's only for now. Next, I believe everyone needs a higher education, so we need to invest more money in community colleges, and by improving career training programs, everyone will be ensured a job by the time they graduate. We need to increase spending in Pell Grants in order to higher education grants to poor students. The issue of education is way too vital to leave to individual states and parents, and it needs federal attention, and that's why we need to increase spending on education.
Thank you, Mr. President. I agree that education is a vital issue. I completely disagree, however, with how you're going about it. You say we need to increase spending, yet you put $8.3 billion into a Pell Grant bill that actually increased tuition costs. We need to cut spending. Most of the money is being wasted. Instead, we should have market-driven improvements and have parents save so that their children can have higher education. Also, we need to roll back Obama's decision to cut subsidies to banks for student loans. Student loans are important, and we need to ensure that every single person will be able to get them. Furthermore, we need to increase parents' roles in education. We need to cut back Pell Grants and instead give them vouchers so they can have school choice and they can enroll in different programs. This will increase the standards as parents can actually choose what school they want their children to go to. We need to hold teachers responsible. We need to tie their compensation to results. And we need to better educate our teachers, as if they're not educated, how can they educate the students? We need transparency and responsibility. I don't agree with what the president said. This is a local and a state issue. This is not just a federal issue. We need to have public data available to parents so they can actually know how their students are doing. And finally, The president said that we can't compete with China and India. That is not true, and that is un-American. America is all about competition. We can compete. We can compete internationally and gain respect.
It's funny that the governor says that he wants to lower tuition because on his first year as governor of Massachusetts, he cut funding for community colleges by 17%, which raised tuitions in schools 59% higher than the national average. He also wants to cut Pell Grants. That would be taking money from special education and poor students. And I don't think we're the type of country that supports taking money from special education and poor students. That's not what America is about, and education is a federal issue and needs our attention.
Thank you. Our next segment is on tax reform. Mr. President, we are going to start with you.
Thank you very much. Now, 4 years ago, when I stood on this stage, I promised that I would cut taxes for middle-class families. And that's exactly what I did. You see, we cut taxes for middle-class families by about $3,600. And the reason is because I believe we do best when the middle class is doing well. And by giving them those tax cuts, they had a little bit more money in their pockets. They could buy that new car. They can buy that computer for their son who's about to go to college. But I have said for incomes over $250,000 a year that we should go back to the rates that we had when Bill Clinton was president, when we created 23 million new jobs and went from a deficit to a surplus. Now, Governor Romney's proposal is that he has been promoting for the past 18 months that calls for a $5 trillion tax cut on top of a $2 trillion of additional spending for our military. And he's saying that he's going to do it, he's going to pay for this by closing loopholes and deductions. Now, the problem is that he's been asked over 100 times how he's going to close these loopholes and deductions, and he just hasn't been able to identify them. Now, I'm going to make a very important point here, Megan. When you add up all the loopholes and deductions the upper income individuals are currently taking advantage of, and you push those aside, and you don't come close to paying for this $5 trillion in tax cuts and $2 trillion in military spending. And that's why independent studies looking at this said the only way to meet Governor Romney's proposal to not reduce the deficit, or rather, not add to the deficit, is by burdening the middle class families.
All right, Governor.
First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for having me here today and giving me this incredible opportunity. And Mr. President, it's an honor to be here with you. Now, obviously, this is a very touchy topic. I was in Dayton, Ohio, and a woman came up to me and grabbed my arm, and she said, "I've been out of work since May. Can you help me?" And the answer is, I can, but it's going to take a different path. Not the path we've been on, not the one President Obama calls a top-down approach. No, that's not my plan. My plan is simple. My plan is to cut taxes. Cut them across the board by about 20%. But in order for us to not lose revenue, I'll also limit deductions and exemptions in order to keep money flowing into the government. My number one principle is that my tax plan will not add to the deficit. I want to underline that my tax plan will not add to the deficit. However, I do want to reduce the burden being paid by middle-income Americans, as the last few years have been economically crushing for them. And through lessening the burden paid by these middle-class Americans, I will restore economic prosperity once again in America.
Okay.
Well, for 18 months, he's been running on this tax plan to add a $5 trillion tax cut and then to add $2 trillion in military spending. And now, 5 weeks before the election, he's saying that his whole big, bold idea is never mind. Now, the fact that you're going to lower the rates that you described, Governor, it's not possible to come up with enough deductions and loopholes to only affect high-income individuals without avoiding to raising the deficit or burdening the middle class. It's just math. It's just arithmetic. It doesn't make sense. That's the analysis of economists who have looked at this. And that kind of top-down economics that you just described as not being so, where folks at the top are doing well, so the average person who's making $3 million is getting $250,000 in tax breaks, while the middle-class families are burned further, that's just not what I believe to be a recipe for economic growth.
Well, first of all, virtually everything you just said about my economic plan is just simply not true. I don't have a $5 trillion tax cut. And you cite studies that say my tax plan will further burden middle-class Americans. Well, I can cite 6 or 7 studies that say your tax plan will add thousands of dollars to middle-income American taxes. But I'm not going to reduce the share of taxes paid by high-income families. They'll do well whether you're president or I am. The people who are struggling are middle-income Americans. They have seen their salaries decrease by $4,000 in the last few years, and at the same time, gas prices have doubled, and food and healthcare prices have gone up crazy. How do we get these people back on their feet and restore the vitality that keeps America running? My tax reforms will relieve Americans of these economic burdens and allow them to thrive once again.
All right, thank you. I'm going to start with you, Mr. President.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank you all for having me here today. I do recognize that government is not the solution to all the problems. Yet I do believe that it should definitely offer solutions to the problems that are too large for an individual to handle. The first of these large problems regards economics. I understand markets are the greatest generators of economic wealth, and every several decades, markets do fail. This has shaped my first term as presidency. Only I have implemented government bailouts of banks in the immense stimulus plan through the government, and therefore I have been able to halt the economy's free fall and lay the groundwork for economic recovery. The first term was not enough time in order to fully recover from the economic downfall, yet I was able to lay the foundation for this recession. I am willing to employ the power and resources of the government in order to intervene in economic activity and believe is the only way for the recovery to occur in the future. I also believe that the removal of government regulations was definitely a cause of the 2008 collapse on Wall Street. Therefore, I passed the Dodd-Frank Act. This act keeps Wall Street honest and protects individuals from predatory financial practices such as credit card debt and exorbitant bank fees. I also understand that regarding healthcare, many Americans die each year because they do not have this necessity and because they are stripped of their assets from the great amount of medical bills. Therefore, I passed Obamacare, which provides all Americans who are not able to buy healthcare with the ability to get healthcare as necessary. And I do require that Americans pay some money for this communal pot, and even Governor Romney agrees with me that this requirement for the insurance companies to pay for the annual preventative exams for women is the right reform, which I have instituted in Obamacare.
Thank you. You know, I'm a self-made man, and I've become successful through, my own perseverance and my own initiative. So too, this is how, we as Americans can solve our economic crisis. I was able to save the 2002 Salt Lake City Olympics through converting the organization from one of more of a bureaucracy into one that focuses more on the individual. I also feel that bailing out big companies and big banks is not the solution. We still have hundreds of houses that are in foreclosure. Hundreds of thousands of houses that are in foreclosure. Many people are losing their jobs. These businesses should be responsible for their own actions. Furthermore, in response to how you said that I agree with you that insurance companies should have preventative exams, I do agree with you. However, I do not agree that they should be forced to buy or to pay for a healthcare system that they do not want. It should be up to the individual to decide whether or not they want to pay for that healthcare. And lastly, I'd like to point out that this country started on capitalism, that the individual is the most important person, and the government has a much smaller role than everyone else. Our country was one of the strongest economic countries going back, but now we have strayed a little bit away from capitalism and have gone a little bit closer towards where the government has a much larger role. And therefore, I believe that the individual should play a much more important role than the government should.
All right, thank you guys for coming.
May I assemble America?